Hello, I'm Mark Hopkinson, and for today's podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Don Shea, Director of Commercial and Industrial Marketing. He'll be distilling food defence down to what he calls the 4 A's of food defence. Welcome, Don.
Well, thanks, Mark. Great to be here and to be able to share some of my experience at the intersection of food manufacturing, technology, and security industries.
You really have a great perspective on food defence, Don. Please tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I've actually come from the high-tech industry, and I've worked at a number of leading technology firms. This has been especially helpful for me as I apply technology solutions to our security industry to help solve food and beverage industry challenges, develop new food defense solutions for our clients.
So what are these 4 A's, and how can they help organizations or companies that need to reduce the risk of tampering or other malicious, criminal, or even terrorist actions on the food supply?
Okay, the 4 A's are really assess, access, alert, and audit. And each one of these, I'd say, needs one more A, and that is attention. Attention from the food companies in order to maximize a food defense program that really protects their consumers and their brands. The first one, assess, is about conducting a risk assessment of the vulnerabilities and potential for food adulteration across the whole food supply chain, and what we call critical control points, or hazard analysis of critical control points. And this is really the first step a food manufacturer must take in the interest of its consumers. The second A is access, and that refers to a key challenge that companies need, especially in authorizing specific access to these critical control points. You know, what we find is that a lot of manufacturers may have very good control over authorizing employees and visitors into their front door. But what the problem we see is that once they're in the door, a lot of these people, especially contractors and 3PL staff, have relatively free access within the plant. And this can present really significant problems in sensitive areas such as let's say a food mixing area. And there's also a possibility of cross-contamination from people that may be passing through areas that are highly allergenic to ones that are not, or from raw materials to processed materials, etc.
So securing access must be especially difficult because of the open layout of many plants, right?
Absolutely. But right now we do have some technologies like Rfid that can be part of that solution.
Could you explain RFID and what it means to food defense?
Sure, Mark. RFID stands for Radio Frequency Identification Technology. And the most frequently commonly used RFID tags are what we refer to as passive RFID tags that are used to gain entry into a facility. Another term that is used for that is proximity access control systems. And they're very effective beyond even the front door into, like, let's say, laboratories or storage areas where they are protected by secured doors. But the problem arises in more open areas, like I mentioned, mixing area, for example, which might be in an open plant with no doors. But there are technologies that use active RFID tags as opposed to passive, where you can kind of map out a virtual hot zone, if you will, that only authorized people are allowed to enter in these areas. And if someone that's not authorized enters into it, alerts gets issued, and the alerts, if you will, is really what happens in the third of the 4 A's.
That's a good segue, Don. So speaking of alerts, what happens when an alert is issued?
Well, that depends on a company's protocol. For instance, alert may go back to a central monitoring site where surveillance video is reviewed in real time to determine if it's or is not a risk. It might be escalated to a plant supervisor that's on the floor, or even someone that's authorized in a mixing area that's actually on the floor. You can actually send an alert directly to that person with that tag. And then that person could then determine how best to address that problem. There are also alerts beyond the physical plant across the whole food supply chain. And this is of really particular interest in food defense because of the global nature of the food supply chain. In the U.S. alone, there are several million farms, if you will, over 400,000 facilities registered by the FDA, of which 60% are foreign facilities. And we import about 20% of our food today. And in some categories like seafood, it goes all the way up to like 75%. And then once it's in the country, there are millions of trucks and moving that product around the country, and there's restaurants and grocery stores that probably number close to 1 million as well that resell the food. So you can see it's a very extensive supply chain. So consequently, that area requires a lot more attention in terms of supply chain security. And with today's technology, with GPS and with other sensors like temperature sensors and humidity sensors that are tied to shipments, it's really possible to monitor the route and to determine if there's any deviation from routes, if a seal's broken, indicating whether there's theft or if a refrigeration unit has malfunctioned. All these alerts can then be issued in real time to really protect your food supply. And this technology can prevent adulterated or stolen foods from re-entering the legitimate food supply chain, which is really the real threat to the brand.
Another huge issue you're leading into is the brand integrity. Can you address this?
Yes. For food manufacturers, what you find is that of the top, 20 global brands, you'll find a lot of food manufacturing companies among those global brands. And, what keeps them awake at night is more than regulatory compliance. It's really about reputation, their brand reputation, and risk to that brand. And especially in today's 24/7 social media world, I'd say that it's not too much of an overstatement to say that today's consumer has as much effect on the brand as their CMO or their chief marketing officer. If something bad happens, word spreads fast, consumption declines, and the brand is damaged, sometimes irreparably. Most recently, the listeners might have heard about the pink slime issue with beef, and virtually in weeks after that went viral, one company had to shut down, and one other plant had to shut down 3 out of 4 of their plants. So it is really the incumbent on the global brand owner to really protect their brand. And, that term might really connote, very large multinational companies. Certainly that's the case. But it's equally important to really a smaller company, such as a premium meat company or, a premium producer of quality goods and foods. It's also a significant issue for their brands. And if they can show how they can execute on these 4 A's, their products can become much more desirable and the brand becomes much more favorable and valuable.
That brings us to the final of the 4 A's, which is?
The last one is audit. Companies really need to be assured that when they set up their protocols and operating procedures, that the people actually follow them. It's one thing for employees to be following a protocol when they send their in-plant auditors onto the plant floor. These guys come around with clipboards and they're checking off different checklists, and most people know what to do and they know what they're being audited for. But with remote video auditing, operation compliance can be viewed and reviewed at any point in time. And for instance, the management can determine if surfaces are being cleaned or the sanitation procedures are being followed the way they're supposed to be. Now, the process of remote video auditing can be conducted in food manufacturing plants on a global basis in real time. And studies have shown that plants that have remote video auditing has used it to raise and retain a much higher compliance levels than if they didn't have it in the past. So that if something goes wrong, the company with an effective auditing program, really has a distinct advantage. It can really point to their audit trails as the process that they're doing to ensure that their brand is being protected, their policy is being followed, and they can really tell the inspectors, say, hey, we didn't let our guard down.
As a wrap-up to this important conversation, what trends do you see emerging in the whole area of food defense?
Well, here's something that's really recently come across my desk, and it's pretty interesting. There's a company called FreightWatch International, and they monitor cargo theft in the U.S. And in the last 2 years, so 2010 was the first time, and then now 2011, the food and drink category has become the most common frequent instance of cargo theft, and it surpassed all other products, including high-tech electronics, which used to always be perennially the number one. And while it seems counterintuitive, unfortunately, it is the reality. Companies need to pay more attention to supply chain risk than ever before. There was another recent study by Price Waterhouse where they asked supply chain managers of global brands, of which I think about a quarter of them were food and beverage companies, about their confidence in managing supply chain risk. And the results showed a high confidence in product safety, but there was a significant lack of confidence in supply chain security. And the question really has to be asked, if you're not very confident in supply chain security, how confident can you be in your food safety? Technologically, we'll see a continued transition from analog to digital, which has already been happening in other vertical markets and other industries. The food industry, like many others, has had a significant installed base of analog cameras and other legacy devices. But with the advantages of IP-based solutions, including video surveillance and access control, we'll continue to see a migration to these newer technologies. And at the same time, the affordability of these solutions and the ability to gradually integrate them with existing systems makes it possible for food manufacturers, both large and small, to compete on a level playing field when it comes to protecting the food supply and safeguarding their brand.
You've been listening to a conversation with Don Shea, Director of Commercial and Industrial Marketing. Thank you, Don, for your insight on the 4 A's of food defense.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's been my pleasure.
For more information, please visit the Resource Centre section on your local Tyco websites.